Let's move on then and let's talk about the cross, because this is the central, as far as I'm concerned, this is probably the greatest question that the Muslims ask me about. And it's the question, if they don't ask me, I ask them. And that is, what are we going to do with the cross? Because it's central to everything I believe. If Christ did not die on the cross, then the whole scope of history comes crashing down. All those prophecies pointing to that fact, there are over 300 prophecies that point to that one man who is going to come to die. The fact that even God himself there in Genesis 3 verse 15 turns to Eve and says, someone from your line, you're going to be my Eve tonight, someone from your line is going to come, he is going to come and crush the head of Satan. If that did not happen, then I am damned, and so are you, and so is everybody watching. We're all damned. And yet Muslims are the first to confront this issue. Now, there are some number of problems with this. They take their reference from Surah 4:157, Surah 4:157 and Surah 4:158, which stipulate and are very clear that Jesus did not die. They thought it so, but another was given his image. Now, there are a number of problems. The first problem is the Quranic confusion. There is a confusion within the Quran on this. Why? Because Surah 19, Ayah 33 contradicts that. Surah 19, Ayah 33 talks in the third person about Jesus. No, it talks in the first person, excuse me, where Jesus himself says this, blessed be me the day I was born, the day I die, present continuous, and the day I rise again. That contradicts Surah 4:157, doesn't it? Because it seems pretty clear to me that from Surah 19:33 that Jesus died and rose again. How do Muslims get out of that? Well, Muslims will say, no. That has nothing to do with the past tense. It has nothing to do with what Jesus did back then. He's going to come a second time, according to the traditions. He's going to come a second time. And when he comes a second time, he's going to come and live on earth. Some say he's going to live for 43 years. He's going to marry, have 3 kids, or some say as many as 7 kids. He's going to destroy all the crucifixes. He's going to destroy all the pigs. And then he's going to die at that time and then rise normally as a human. But that's a future tense. So this is referring to the future coming. The problem is that this is present continuous. Look at the Arabic. There's no sa before it. They have to put a sa before it to make it future. There is no future in the verse. What's more, if you look at verse 15 in the same chapter, in Surah 19, verse 15, it refers to John the Baptist, Yahya, and it says the exact same thing about John the Baptist, but this time in the third person. Blessed be he, the day that he was born, the day that he dies, present continuous, and the day he rises again. Now, we know good and well that John did come, he did die, and he'll rise again at the end of time. So obviously, if it works for John, it has to work for Jesus. Well, I'm not going to sit there and quibble about the Muslims on that. I realize that they have a problem with this. That's their own Quranic confusion. I leave that confusion with them. I know that every Muslim believes that Jesus did not die. Jesus did not die. Not all of them believe that it wasn't he on the cross. The Ahmadiyas believe he was on the cross, but you've already got that Quranic confusion. The second problem is a theological confusion. If someone was given his image, then that stands directly in contradiction to Surah 6, Ayah 164, and Surah 53, Ayah 38, which stipulates very clearly that nobody can take on the sin, nobody can take on the guilt of another. Those verses were included in the Quran basically to abrogate or to eradicate any possibility of Jesus taking on our sin. But in doing that, that also abrogates and eradicates the possibility of a man taking on Jesus' sin. Because if Jesus was not on the cross, someone else was taking his place. Someone else was given his image. And in giving his image, they are then taking on his guilt, are they not? Therefore, there's a contradiction. There's a theological confusion here. Thirdly, there's an extra-biblical confusion, and that is a historical confusion. What do I mean by this? Well, any historian worth their salt does not go to the Quran to find out whether Jesus was on that cross or not. They go to other extra-biblical evidence. They go to men like Thales. Thales, a Greek historian, who was actually debating with Phlegon back in 50 AD, and basically 20 years after Christ's death, they were debating about the crucifixion of Jesus, and they were debating whether or not on that day the earth shook and the sun went dark. They were very clear, they knew very well that was Jesus was on the cross. They had no doubt that was Jesus or not. We also know that Josephus, in about 80 to 90 AD, the latter part of the first century, Josephus, a Jewish historian, wrote very clearly while he was living in Rome that was Jesus who died on the cross. Tacitus, who is a Roman historian writing in 80 AD, he mentions the death of Jesus. So you have a Greek historian, a Jewish historian, and a Roman historian, all three of them within the first century, all writing that that was Jesus on the cross. They had no problem admitting that that was Jesus. Now, if you're going to have Muslims believing that that was not Jesus, their only testimony is 600 years later. I'll go with the first century testimony because it's closest to the event. So they've got a problem, a confusion, and certainly a contradiction with the historical record. Fourthly, what about the eyewitnesses? See, there were people that were there at the cross, were they not? John, the favorite disciple of Jesus, was at the cross, was he not? He was right there. Jesus talked to him. He told John to take care of his mother. In fact, if that were the case, what about Mary? She was at the cross. Mary knew Jesus intimately. Goodness sake, she birthed him. She knew him for 33 years. John had known him for the last 3 years. They both knew who was on the cross. They both knew that was Jesus. If it had been someone else, don't you think they would have recognized it? For that matter, put yourself in the man's place. Whoever that man was that was given his image, don't you think he would have said something about it? Hey guys, listen, it's not me. Believe me. Don't look at me. Listen to my voice. Mary, you know me. You birthed me. Come on, ask me any question. Any question, I won't be able to answer it. To prove it's not me. I mean, certainly he would have said something. I know I'm joking about it, but can you see the seriousness of what we're talking about? If someone else was given that image, they would complain. I would complain. You would complain. Anybody would complain. And certainly Mary and John would have known that that was not Jesus on the cross. We don't hear any reference to that whatsoever. So that's the fourth problem. And then fifthly, and this is probably the biggest problem. This is the one that I have the biggest problem with. This is the moral contradiction. This is the moral confusion. Stop and think. If Jesus was not on the cross and another was there that took his place, then what was Jesus doing 3 days later, coming up to the upper room, going in front of the disciples and claiming that it was he, showing them the holes in his hands and the holes in his feet when Thomas questioned him a week later? What kind of prophet would claim something he'd never done? Why is it Jesus never bothered to tell any of them that it was not he on the cross? Why did he spend the next 50 days appearing before 500 people, claiming for every case that it was he that was on the cross when he wasn't? And what's more, here's the worst problem. What kind of God puts another man on the cross and then doesn't bother to tell anybody? Doesn't tell any of the disciples? Doesn't tell anybody for 600 years. And then finally, 600 years later, suddenly it gets in his mind, uh-oh, I better do something about this. Let me go tell that illiterate man down there who is a camel herder, let me go tell him that it was not Jesus, it was another man. Let's tell that man, and hopefully he will change the world. What kind of God does that? That's a deceitful God. I don't want anything to do with a God like that. I don't see that kind of God at all in this book. God does not deceive. No, he does not deceive for 600 years. He does not lead millions of people to perdition. He does not have a whole church formed who died. Every one of the disciples died believing that that was Jesus on the cross, except for John. But what's more, the Muslims still have the same dilemma that everybody else has, that the Jews have, that the Romans have, that the atheists have, that the agnostics have, and that is, where is the body? No one has ever found the body. If it was not Jesus, then why couldn't they just simply show the body? Can you see the problems if Jesus was not on the cross? Thank God we don't have these problems. I've never heard a Muslim that can come back on any one of these 5 problems. They are confusions, I understand it, and I leave it to them.